again, everyone, and welcome back to Reddit Aliens. I'm John. Thank you for being here. Straightforward topic, so let's get right to it. What's the scariest true story you know? Please remember to like, share, and subscribe. When I was young, free and single, there was a guy who lived in my neighborhood who I used to bump into a lot. He lived on my block. He was a little older than me, but we socialized at the same local bar, and I knew him from round and about the place. One night I was socializing at the bar, having a few drinks with friends, and wound up talking to him. He was a nice enough lad, a bit shy, but we chatted for most of the evening on and off. Towards the end of the night, with a few drinks taken and us getting on so well, he invited me back to his place. I knew he still lived with his parents, plus, honestly, I wasn't overly pushed on liking him, so I declined and went home. About 5 days later, our block was surrounded by police. The street he lived on was cordoned off, and over the day we heard that there had been a double murder. This was back before the 24-hour news cycle and social media, so we heard it all in bits and pieces from neighbors, and finally on the news. This guy that I had been talking to at the bar had murdered both of his parents about 9 days before I got to chatting to him at the bar. There had been an argument in the household between him and his parents about him not having a job and about his future, etc., and he ended up stabbing both of his parents to death. He rolled their bodies up in rugs and just lived with them for about 2 weeks, in summer. Neighbors noticed that they hadn't seen his parents out and about, and there was an accumulation of blue bottles at the window. His uncle, brother of his mother, lived close by, and it's not 100% clear if he gained access to the house first or if the police did. But either way, access was gained and the bodies were discovered. What the F was his plan for when I went back to his house and discovered his parents' bodies there in the living room floor? Still creeps me out. My brother was a police officer. He had a call to check on the welfare of a mother who had not showed up for work. She had died on the sofa, and her little toddler brought the little diaper pad and laid down next to her and died of dehydration. The little kid had opened the lower cabinets and drawers in the kitchen looking for food. He still cries about it, and he's not the crying kind. This is a could-have-been story, but still scary in its own right. My father and little brother were active in scouting in the 60s. One weekend, they were heading out on a patrol activity, which means only 4 to 5 boys. They were going to hike in on Saturday morning, camp the usual fashion, hike out Sunday afternoon. Perfectly normal stuff, just small group rather than the whole troop, and thus only one adult, my father. They drove to the drop-off point, and it was pouring. Dark gray from horizon to horizon, water running across the level ground in sheets. Not the weather you want to walk for an hour and set up camp in. You can stay dry if you start dry, but this was not that case. They waited in the car, playing dumb games and whatever else Boy Scouts do, except for little Jimmy, who decided to nap. Eventually, they decided that it wasn't worth it and headed home. Jimmy was awake and asleep on the ride back, and nobody thought anything of it. Got everyone delivered back home, and that was that. Embarrassing, a blow to the pride, but not fatal. We heard later that Jimmy continued in and out of consciousness that afternoon, and by dinner time, his parents took him to the local ER, where he was diagnosed as being in his first diabetic coma, a condition which was to affect him for the rest of his life. 40 years later, my father still just shivers to rethink what would have happened if we hadn't been rained out. Little Jimmy would almost certainly have died, probably never waking up, and we'd have never known why. Dodged a bullet that day. Could have been a friggin' catastrophe for multiple families. That's a pretty crazy story, and I'm glad it's a could've and not did've, so good for Jimmy, and I hope he's doing well. Ariel Castro's kidnapping. He kidnapped 3 women and held them hostage in his house for almost a decade. He would rape them, and if they got pregnant, Ariel would punch their stomachs to force a miscarriage. The only one he spared from a miscarriage was Amanda Berry. He would also test them to see if they would try to escape when he left the house, and had a makeshift clock alarm rigged to his door that would activate if it was opened. It got worse when in court he equated his actions to addictions and alcoholism. Back in the 80s, there was a boarding dorm, not sure that's the proper term for it, but I can't think of a better English word, about a block and a half from my dad's place. It was meant for school trips, scouts, or other organized events that hosted a large amount of kids. They could overnight there or even stay several days, sometimes even weeks, while they attended whatever it was they came here for. Anyway, it opened up in the 80s and it was supposed to host a group of scouts, but they had then rotten luck of being caught in a storm. And not just a regular storm, but a pretty bad one. Flashing lightning, heavy winds, pouring like crazy. They actually put out warnings for people to stay indoors and bunker until it passed. That kind of storm. The group still arrived and took shelter indoors. Nobody really knows how it happened, but one of the kids got separated from the group and left the building in the middle of the storm. Search parties went out for him, but were forced to cut their search short and come back empty-handed. Days go by with no sign of the kid anywhere, and the panic becomes real as they begin to suspect that he's not just lost somewhere. On the 4th day after his disappearance, he was found on the beach, having passed away from what was determined to be a drowning. Nobody knows what exactly happened to him, but the place got shut down for a few months after that while investigations were ongoing. Eventually, the place reopened and continued to host many more parties and other events until they finally closed down permanently in 2019. When I was 12 years old, I always spent every other weekend at my mother's house. She lived alone with my sister. This day, though, my sister was out with her boyfriend for the day, leaving just my mother and I at home alone. My mother has never been one to actually spend time with me, so typically on her visiting weekends, she was in bed or on her phone in her bedroom, and I was in the living room watching television or on the computer. This one specific day, I was on the computer. My dad had just set up a Facebook profile for me a couple days prior, so I was talking to one of my friends on the site, when out of nowhere I got a message from my mother. All she said was, "Come here." I was concerned only because she normally would just call my name or come to me. I decided I would just go to her, thinking she was just tired or wasn't feeling well. When I walked into her bedroom though, she was asleep. I even woke her up and asked her what she needed, and she was perplexed by me questioning her. I told her about the message, and she simply said that I have a wild imagination and quickly fell back to sleep, snoring soon after. I went back out to the computer, and only a few minutes later, I got another message from my mother. It read, "I said come here." I went back into her room and she was asleep, still snoring. I was frightened and confused at this point. I decided to go back to the computer and log out to watch some television instead. I had the volume low as to not disturb my mother. Then I started to hear laughing, knowing it wasn't my sister, and no one else was in the house with my sleeping mother and I jumped. I instantly ran into my mother's room where she was still snoring. I woke her up and asked her how long she had been asleep, and she assured me she'd been sleeping ever since I last woke her. I told her about what happened, but I never figured out who the messages were from or what was laughing. I never believed in ghosts. Most of my thoughts are just that my mother was pranking me, but she seemed startled too when I told her what had happened. Okay, so this is actually a horror story from a sleepover I went to about 1 year ago, maybe less. Me and my friend are both about the same age and have been best friends for years. We talk 24/7 and know everything about each other. Both of us have major sleeping issues. My friend gets really bad trauma nightmares and it causes them to not sleep. I get sleep paralysis. I've never actually seen anything like a demon, but I always feel like they are there. I'm sure you guys know the feeling. So about a week before I went over, we were both up talking on the phone because we were scared to sleep. It was about 2 a.m. and I think we were drawing or something. I could see my friend, but I couldn't see around them, just kind of their face. I remember looking up from my drawing and seeing a terrified look on their face. I asked what was wrong, and they said there was something standing outside the back porch. They said it looked to be like 8 to 9 feet tall. I was like, "No way, bro, you're lying." So they flipped their camera to show me the porch. I saw nothing and told them they should probably go to bed. I know they didn't want to, and neither did I, but I didn't want my friend going insane because they're tired. I brushed it off and continued with my week as normal. We were talking again about halfway through the week, and my friend asked me to come over for a sleepover. Of course, I said yes and went over that weekend. We spent the whole day at the park and then came back around 5. We both crashed and then woke back up around 10 p.m. I woke up first, and after about an hour I woke them up. We spent the next few hours doing makeup looks, outfits, art, listening to music, etc. Once it was about 1 to 2 a.m., we decided horror stories were a good idea. Wrong. This was about to make our situation a lot worse. We both told a few horror stories while sitting in their closet with a single candle. As I was getting to the end of the last story, the candle went out on its own. We both freaked out and jumped, running out of the closet. After the horror stories, we looked at the time, and I'm pretty sure it was like 3. That freaked us out a little more, but we tried to ignore it. Both of us then agreed it was time to grab a snack, so we snuck downstairs to get one. I went straight to the fridge and found a thing of whipped cream. We started doing some dumb stuff with the whipped cream, like throwing it or something. That's when I saw it. A tall, dark figure with no face was standing outside the back door. I looked over at my friend and could tell that they had seen it too. And then they had the guts to say, "Believe me now?" I was petrified. I mean, this is something out of horror movies, but I swear to you, it is real. We didn't do anything about the figure. Didn't go near it, didn't say hello, didn't open the door, nothing. We watched it like hawks and went up the stairs backwards. When we got up to their room, we closed and locked the door. I honestly thought that I was probably just seeing things, so I decided to go to bed. I fell asleep and then woke up to what I thought was only 30 minutes later. But I realized my friend wasn't there when I scanned the room with my eyes. That's when I got really scared. I couldn't move, I was stuck, and I just had to wait and scan the room till it was over. That's when I saw it, the figure. When I tell you I've never been so scared in my life, I'm being truthful. This thing was at least 8 feet tall and was hunched over because it couldn't fit in the room without doing so. That's how tall it was. So the whole time, it had been standing behind the bed, hunched over, staring at me, and I didn't see it until I looked up. It went on like this for what felt like forever until I was shaken awake by my friend. The thing and my friend's red LED-lit room seemed to fade from my vision as the sunlight faded in. My friend said I was creeping them out because I was just staring at the ceiling. I told them about what happened, and they believed me. We spent the rest of the day at the lake, and then I went home. I didn't see the figure again after I left. I'm honestly scared to go back and haven't been over there since. I'm going for a sleepover next weekend. Wish me luck. I'm very skeptical and cynical, so it takes a lot to rattle me. Don't believe in anything supernatural, spiritual, etc. But Elisa Pam's death and discovery almost 2 weeks later in her hotel's water tank is so terrifying to me. Hotel security cameras show her alone, so murder seems unlikely. She did have a history of mental illness, but not suicidal tendencies. It also seems unlikely that she would have killed herself by drowning, but even if that was the case, it's equally terrifying that her illness could cause her to do so. Watching the elevator footage of this woman going in and out of the elevator and looking down the hall, it is pretty creepy in and of its own. Regardless of what happened, it's a wild-looking story. Have you seen it? One time it was around 2 or 3 a.m. I woke up from a dry throat and went to get some water. Then I sat in our couch and looked out the window. We lived in the middle of the woods, and I was just sitting, sipping the water. Then I heard screaming. That scared the hell out of me because it sounded so close. We had 2 neighbors, by the way. And so I'm looking out the window, just looking around, seeing what the hell was going on, and that's when I see it. There were probably 2 or 3 of them. I don't know what they were, but they were just standing there staring me dead in the eye. I slowly got up, but once I turned my back, I heard another scream. So I turned around again and they were gone. I ran to my room and flung the sheets over my head. I heard the screaming again, so got enough courage to take the sheets off my head, and I looked out the window in our room, and the things were standing on the right outside the window. And we made eye contact, and this lasted for about 5 minutes until I ran into the bathroom and locked myself in there for the rest of the night. So I feel like this skirts the edge. In the town where my family is from, there's stories of the Goat Man, basically a satire that dicks around with people, stealing stuff from the yard, throwing random debris around. One man claims the Goat Man threw a tire at him from the side of the road. There was a tire on the road where it supposedly happened, but it's a tire, not a spear made from the bones of Nephilim. It's not odd to see them on the road. Anyway, my great-uncle supposedly got chased by the beast. He was so terrified that he drove his car through the living room of my great-grandmother's house and died of fright, death caused by excessive distress, which is actually a thing apparently. He lived long enough to babble, "Goat Man, road, couldn't get away," to my mom. I was there and remember the crash, but never saw any Goat Man hybrid, so I can't say what actually happened, but the man did see something that scared him enough to kill him. Me and some friends decided to climb this mountain in the middle of nowhere in my friend's car. It's mid-May, and the sun is setting really rapidly while we're climbing. It's odd because it's like 5 and again mid-May. So anyway, we get to the top of the mountain and stop at this old house with a barn, which wouldn't be creepy if the inside of the house didn't look like someone had just gone out to the store. Uncapped soap, unmade beds, some food containers on the counter, a cutting board with a knife, etc. And if the barn didn't have red writing on the door, that was scratched away until it wasn't readable anymore. Anyway, so this house obviously hasn't had someone in it in years, if the giant abandoned hornet's nest on the door was any indication. When we got out of the car, the first thing we notice is the silence. There's nothing. No birds or bugs or even wind. But we're teens and stupid, so we decide to walk out into the old blueberry field behind the house. And this field is completely dead, even though plants are now green and budding. But not this field. This field has dead stems and leaves, that's it. Anyway, we look at the view and watch the sun get lower and lower in the sky, and we're starting to get uncomfortable. We're starting to feel like we're being watched and we're getting anxious, so we decide to leave, arguably the best choice we made all night. We get back to the car, but it doesn't start. It doesn't even make a sound when the key is turned, which is weird because my friend just got a bunch of fixed replaced on her car, including the battery. So we do the next reasonable thing, which is calling our parents to tell them what's happening before calling AAA to send a truck. My phone is the only one that had service, which looking back is terrifying, but that's more of a personal thing. So anyway, a truck is sent, and while we wait, the uncomfortable feelings just get worse, along with the darkness. Finally, the truck contacts us to tell us that they're not coming to get us, but they sent another truck. The other truck does the same thing. Finally, we have to call my friend's mom to have her come get us. When she gets there, we get our stuff and pile into the minivan. But as we're heading towards the van, my friend looks back at her car and says, "Is there someone in my car?" And I look back as all the lights of the dead car turn on and then off again, and all the doors lock. I should mention that this car did not have automatic locking doors, and even if it did, my friend just realized her keys are in the car. Needless to say, we hurry up on the leaving. We're heading down the mountain, and all of us are too filled with panic to speak or look out towards the window, so we mainly keep our heads down and focus on each other. We all went home, but none of us slept or even turned out our light because we were so afraid. Anyway, when the car is finally taken down and taken to the mechanics, it starts. It starts in an instant, and the mechanics can't find anything that would even possibly be wrong. My friend was dragged up there by some of her other friends, and there was new writing in a language she didn't know, but guessed it was Latin. It's been over a year, but it still messes me up a lot, even if it's not creepy. It's the most terrifying to me to this day. Pretty wild. Who knows? Could have been a faulty wire, or it could have been a ghost farmer and you disturbed his house, so you get what you deserve. I don't know. Wouldn't go down that road. No one will probably read this. Hi. But in 2004, Pennsylvania, me and my friends were obsessed with going into abandoned buildings, caves, and sewers. I think we were looking for some excitement. One day during fall, we decided to go down a manhole that was left open by the city. Me and my old buddy David climbed down because my other buddies Joe, Chris, and Skylar chickened out. We got down the ladder, and it's exactly how you'd expect. A long, dark tunnel with a sewage stream down the middle. I had brought my older brother's military-looking angle-head flashlight with me, and we started walking down the sewers a little bit. After yelling back to our friends to come down and stop being scared, something grabbed my coat on my arm and tugged it back. I pulled away and pushed into David and told him to run. I can't describe the sound I heard as I was running, but I swear it was wheezing. We told our friends, but they didn't believe us, of course. Eventually, I forgot about this, and I recently moved to Wisconsin a couple of years ago. I just found out David died in July of 2018, and all of a sudden I remembered this traumatizing memory. I felt an eerie feeling of doom lately, and I can't help but think it's related to this incident. Even typing, I have goosebumps. Was it a monster? Was it a homeless person? Was it a pendant worker trying to scare us? I didn't imagine it, and I'm currently doing research to see if there are any other reports of wheezing creatures in the sewers of Pennsylvania. So I actually have two stories. The first is a story from my hometown, suburbs of Vienna. Sometime at the beginning of the 20th century, a few sources say 1908-1910, there was a group of 20-something-year-old friends in said suburbs. One night a fight broke out within the group, during which one of the men died and another man, Tony, was sentenced to life in prison. He spent about 20 years there, until on his deathbed, one of the men that had been in the fight confessed to being the actual killer. Tony was released, but he wasn't able to get a job or friends. He had to live in a cave in the forest above Modeling, now called Grammy Tone Hole, which roughly translates to pork rinds, Tony Cave. During the summer, he spent his time up there, and during the winter, some families let him sleep in their barns, cellars, or attics, and gave him, you guessed it, pork rinds to eat. He died up there in that cave. I just think it's horrible to have your life be turned like that. People said that he was very nice, but he never was given a second chance at life, even though he was innocent. The second story is a more recent one. There was a couple living in the suburbs of Vienna. My family knew them, and they had 3 children. The father was Austrian, the mother was from Barbados. In 2011, they decided to vacation there and live with the mother's family. All went well until one evening, there was a knock on the door. The mother's dad opened the door only to be shot multiple times right after, all in front of the whole family. The father wanted to help the mother's dad as he fell to the ground and was shot as well. The children had to watch the whole thing. The mother's dad died on the spot. The father died on the way to the hospital. Later, it was revealed that the killers had knocked on the wrong door. They wanted to kill the owners of the house next door.